Chris leads strategic research into trustworthy AI, AI for science and AI assurance. His work supports the development of reliable, transparent and fit-for-purpose AI systems, particularly in critical sectors such as healthcare and manufacturing. He also holds a professorship in systems and synthetic biology at University College London, where his academic research focuses on AI, computational modelling, engineering, biology and biomedical applications. Chris.
Thanks everybody, and thanks for the invitation to come to Durham. It's a lovely place, walked up the river to get here, it's very nice. I'm going to talk, and this seems like a very, very cool meeting, and I'll hopefully give you some, I agree with everything that's been said previously, but hopefully give you a little bit of a different take in terms of kind of push from industry. But first of all, I'll explain what NPL is. If you're a physicist, you've probably heard of it. National Physical Laboratory is the National Metrology Institute. If I say that to a member of the public and they ask me if I can give them a weather forecast, but that's meteorology. Okay, we have about 1,400 staff, and we're the institute that defines the standards and the SI units. So I work in the data science and AI department. It's changed form over the years, so it was mathematics at one point, but we work on different aspects of data, algorithms, software quality, semantic technologies, trustworthy machine learning and AI, and uncertainty propagation through data pipelines. And these aspects all feed in, and I think make our department quite unique. We're also close to scientific applications. So, kind of a broad overview of our work in this area is given here. So I should say that I've only, I joined NPL in November, so I'm going to present lots of work and largely none of it is mine. But I've come in and helped direct the research and activities. So we have a strong focus on trustworthy AI, and I'll talk about that soon. And also AI for metrology, or AI for science, and AI assurance. And I think this will fit in nicely and complement the previous two talks. So let's talk about trustworthy AI. So, we don't do a very good job of selling what we're doing, so that's partly the reason I'm here today. We've been working on these aspects of trustworthy AI. So we heard previously, language models are stochastic. Even in that capability plot that we just saw, if you looked at Opus, Claude Opus, there's large error bars there. Okay, we need to have uncertainty quantification, data quality, good evaluation metrics, and interpretability, and build on standard approaches like software quality. And we've been working on this for the past few years. So one of the things that we haven't touched on here so far is data. So you've probably heard of garbage in, garbage out, which is a machine learning kind of truism. What you probably don't know is that Charles Babbage also recognised this when he was developing the analytical engine. And we hear, we've heard earlier about emergent capabilities and misalignment, things like that. But we never really attribute that to actually the data that the algorithms have been trained on. People have started to realise now that actually thinking about what goes into your model has a big effect. And we work on on different aspects of data quality for AI algorithms. So there are lots of different kind of properties you can think of, and you know, there are existing. I got a point. Yeah, there are existing standards for data quality that cover these different properties, and we're using that to look at the impact of different aspects of data quality on model performance. So we also work on the metrological foundations for AI measurement. So this is, and I'll have more to say about this later. But for example, something simple like classification. You know, the uncertainty metrics for classification are not fit for purpose. Okay, so we need new metrics for quantifying uncertainty in a mathematically consistent framework. And we've been working on that. We also work on machine learning approaches with uncertain inputs, which again is largely unexplored in machine learning literature because there was never a push for it. Uncertainty quantification for generative AI algorithms. So here's an example where we've used different types of generative models, so GANs and diffusion models, and we can propagate uncertainty and use those to detect things like artifact. I'm not going to call it hallucination because it's not hallucination, it's just wrong. There, okay, there's an artifact that should not be there, and the uncertainty quantification picks it up. So we're really talking about these fundamental processes, fundamental algorithmic properties that we need in order to develop this trustworthy approach. Again, we focus a lot, as you can imagine, at NPL. We focus a lot on uncertainty, so trying to disentangle different sources of uncertainty. So a common approach in the literature is aleatoric versus epistemic uncertainty. So that's kind of variation versus model uncertainty. So and we're developing methods to do that, and also metrics for uncertainty reliability. So this is, if you have a machine learning algorithm with some uncertainty, how do you calibrate that uncertainty such that it gives the correct, or at least a statistically robust uncertainty? So I'll skip through those. We also do fair and traceable data curation, so not just data quality, but we can advise on how to store your data and make it accessible such that it's fair. So one thing that not a lot of people know we work on is semantic technologies, and for a lot of the things we heard earlier, semantic technologies are really important. So you may have heard of neurosymbolic platforms. These are perhaps one of the next types of models beyond transformers. This is where you hardwire ontologies into your language models. We can do that in an ad hoc way. We can format inputs and outputs in terms of ontologies, so we can detect automatically when the model is misaligned, for example. And we can also structure communication between agents in agentic workflows. These are things that we're planning to work on. So we also developed this trustworthy and safe AI lifecycle. So this is about how you develop and deploy an AI system such that you monitor, so you trust and you demonstrate that trust. So what all these techniques start with is a risk assessment, and that risk assessment will depend on the context, obviously. So you might, and given those risks, you might accept different levels of uncertainty or interpretability, and you map those risks to metrics that you measure. So you then use that risk management risk framework to measure those metrics. You identify benchmarks, and one of the most important things is that this is a life cycle. So one of the differences with software is that you generally tested the software and then deployed it, but we are advocating continuous monitoring in deployment, and we heard earlier about the agent being the agentic workflow being applied in deployed in a different system so that it was tested, and we have to build that into how we deploy and test these systems. So if you're interested in this, we have a few case studies. Coupling development, this is one here which is based on a medical device. You can basically see how we perform the risk assessment. So here's kind of a high level analysis of all the risks, and that requires consultation with a multidisciplinary group including clinicians, etc. And you decide on the risks, you map those to metrics, and you demonstrate the performance that satisfies those particular requirements. So here, it's even for a simple medical device, there's a lot of considerations. So just in safety and robustness, there's all these different kinds of terminologies and things to show for the algorithm. So there's some basics on the stuff we're doing in Trustworthy AI, and that does form kind of a bedrock for the other activities that we do. So I thought I would give an overview of how we're using mostly machine learning. If you distinguish between machine learning and AI, then it's mostly traditional machine learning with kind of adaptive learning, but we're also moving towards more agentic type approaches. We can see that this is used in lots of different scientific areas at NPL, and I think it's clear that AI and machine learning are going to become an integral part of the scientific method. So I just wanted to talk about one example because I think it's cool, and that's in how we currently are working towards defining the AMP. Okay, so you might find this boring, but it's very important because all of your calibrated current, electric currents will eventually, be using this kind of method. Okay. So since 2019, the AMP is defined in terms of elementary charge, E, and people have been building these single electron pumps. Actually, it's very cool, it's not boring. And they're nanoscale devices, and basically you can produce quantized currents with them. Okay? So if you look down here at this potential well here, you have two voltages and a magnetic field that you can control to shape this well, and at certain values you get a single electron going through the gate. And what the challenge is to then define the current through the frequency that these electrons are going through the gate. Okay. Here's what it looks like in reality. And over here is what we call the plateau, and that shows the current as a heat map as a function of the two control voltages. So V exit, which controls the exit peak, and V entrance, which controls the entrance peak. This is single electrons going through that gate. This is two electrons going through the gate. And then up here you get these weird quantum effects, like two electrons going in, but only one coming out. So actually, although this is used to define the amp, you can actually, people are keen to actually explore fundamental physics, because you can look at the physics of single electrons in isolation. So that's very cool. That's why I chose it. So by tuning the voltages, you can get one electron to load and unload. So the question is can we scale this? So why do we want to do that? So we want to basically define the amp in terms of this, but in order to get the currents up to the required level, we need to run many of these gates in parallel. And they all need tuning. So, you know, we want to be in this region here, this first plateau, so they need to be tuned. And, you know, at the start, people were doing it manually. And what that allows us to do is to define currents that we can calibrate against in this region. And that's important for air quality and other metrology processes. So the goal is to run hundreds of these pumps in parallel, tune those voltages and the magnetic field such that one electron is going through at each time. So there are challenges with how these gates are manufactured as well. You can't control these voltages independently for each one. So it's really challenging. So we're using machine learning right now, but we will be using more interesting approaches at some point. So we have this approach that uses active learning. So essentially what this does is it takes data and then uses that data to predict the next measurements. Okay. So when I started working on reinforcement learning, we referred to this as an agent. But I guess it's changed. It's kind of changed meaning now. But the agent, in a way, predicts the next experiments to do based on the previous experiments. You can see it in action here. The orange points are the next experiments, and the idea is that we quantify this plateau. So that's described in this paper. But recently we've been doing. So there's challenges with this approach because it was done on a grid, and so that's quite wasteful. So recently we've been developing that further. So I'm using this again, adaptive learning, which has these different aspects of point selection, in-painting, uncertainty quantification, and then choosing more data points. So we can actually tune what we call exploration versus exploitation, which means do we want to explore the space or do we want to choose the optimum voltages? And so, you know, part of the kinds of things we do is use data augmentation approaches. So that's where you have low amounts of data, but we do data generation or synthetic data generation in a principled way. So here's another one. So we're shifting that plateau, and what we're doing here is training this in-painting model. So given some points, it can recapitulate this plateau. So you can see it's much more efficient than the previous approach. So given some measured points like this, it can generate the real target, and that's the model prediction. So this is using standard convolutional neural networks to do that. One of the cool things about this as well is that we use the uncertainty quantification to tell us which place in the voltage space to sample next. And we can, as I mentioned, we can split that into two sources of variance. So traditionally the aleatoric variance is kind of the noise in the physics, and the epistemic variance is the noise in our lack of data. So the quantum physicists know that actually in the middle of this plateau the physics is noisier. So we can combine these different kinds of information to choose the experimental points in a principled way. So yeah, that's the summary there. We're still working on quantifying that, but hopefully it gives you some idea of how we're using machine learning in this fundamental physics application. Okay, so now in the last part I want to talk about AI assurance, which I think is heavily related to the previous talks that we just heard. So why do we need AI assurance? So we heard about kind of the security implications of us not having our own model. But also, if we want to assure a system, having external models is not really great for assurance either, right? And that's demonstrated by this first statement. One of the most critical barriers to widespread AI adoption is, one of the reasons is our inability to conduct AI assurance at scale. So we might have amazing models, but if we can't deploy them in a consistent way, no one's going to invest, or at least businesses are not going to use them. So we see this when we talk to businesses, banks and all kinds of sectors. They happily generate pilot projects, but when it comes to deployment, there's no guarantee. They're not going to invest in deploying it, because that's a huge commitment without some kind of guarantees or assurance. Okay? So in a way, this is a different angle, but leads to the same kinds of conclusions. And personally, I think there's the security aspects, and I agree, but I think there will be a bit of a pushback. We'll move back to small language models, more specific models where we know the data that's gone in, and then they will be more trustworthy and can be assured. But we'll see if that's true or not in a few years, I guess. Okay. So assurance basically produces evidence that leads to justified trust. So there is a market out there already. It's quite broad, and AI assurance can mean many different things. It can mean risk assessment, impact assessment, bias audit, testing and validation, so that actual testing is what we're really focusing on. Conformity assessment, this is where a body tests whether your algorithm conforms to some specifications. And there are the ecosystem comprises regulators, accreditation bodies, standard bodies and assurance providers. So why are we in this space? So the UK government has started to promote AI assurance as one of the UK's, an area that the UK is leading in. So yeah, it relates to AI Security Institute. They're actually one of our partners. So we're good at that. And they claim that there's 524 AI assurers. So they can be SMEs, they can be big consultancies, so Deloitte, PricewaterhouseCoopers, they're doing AI assurance. Probably about 200 or 200 or 300 are technical assurers. Okay? So they want to boost this ecosystem, because this is what we need in order to get AI into companies being used and improving the building a better economy. So there's a big opportunity. So this estimate is about 7 billion by 2035. So the UK could be a world leader in providing AI assurance, products and services. The challenges are numerous. So science and tooling gaps, how do we do AI assurance? We do have quality infrastructure. It's developing to support the assurance framework. Currently it's a bit fragmented, and we need to kind of put forward a plan and really, work together in this space. So, where does NPL come in here? So we're about measurement. That's our remit, and measuring the properties of AI systems, the performance. So benchmarking, metrics, comparisons, good practice, that's NPL's remit, and that's why we're working in this area. So they're the definitions of measurement. Why do we need measurement for AI? So ensuring trust and safety, such that everybody agrees, defining acceptable performance limits, and comparing and contrasting different algorithms. So we recently had a meeting at Bushy House. Actually, it's quite interesting because the first meeting was held in the 50s on this area, and involved people like Turing and others leading in the field. So they have an old report from that meeting. But this was getting the measure of AI. So we came up with these guiding principles, which is kind of what we talked about previously. So clear evaluation frameworks, transparency and explainability, communication. So there's context-dependent and risk-based assurance. So this is this risk assessment type approach. And I should also point out, we're talking about the system level. We're not talking about the neural network or the language model. We're talking about the whole system and how it's deployed. So you can have a look at this paper here if you're interested. So we've been established as the Centre for AI Measurement. So this is funded by DCIT, and kicks off in next week, technically, start of April. So the Centre's mission and scope is to advance scientifically robust AI assurance. And there are three main aspects to that. So leading collaborative R&D. So this is where we research new testing, evaluation, verification, validation methodologies. A large fraction of the money is to support industry, so to work with third-party assurers, and also to create an assurance innovation network so that everybody's communicating in this area. So this is my simplified view of the AI assurance ecosystem. So at the top here we have the developers and deployers. Deployers might be the NHS, etc., or it could be a bank. There could be in-house assurance for developers as well. And then we have the third-party assurers, and then we have the AI measurement centre down here. So what's interesting is we do have accreditation body, UCAS. So an example right now is this ISO 42001. Don't know if you've heard of this, but this is an AI standard. This is a standard for implementing AI systems, but it's a governance framework. It doesn't it doesn't have any kind of performance aspect. But an assurer might certify somebody for conforming to that standard, and in order to do so they might have this, they would need this standard, so 42006, and they're accredited by UCAS. So that's the idea. These standards are those ones are well established, but the more system performance based standards are still in development. It's very early days, but that's where we think we can help. Not by setting standards straight away, but certainly good practice. So how can we set the methods and approaches that everybody will use? So delivery roadmap. So the first year is laying foundations, and then we scale up to bigger impact. And here the current research themes. So uncertainty quantification, decision theoretic approaches. So this is, how do you look at uncertainty when you're actually using the algorithm? So a lot of this kind of research uses benchmarks. But benchmark in a test scenario does not conform to performance when it's been deployed, as we heard earlier. So this is where decision theoretic approaches can help. Uncertainty quantification for LLMs and agents. So we know that if we put the same prompt into a language model, you get different outcomes. I mean, even for coding, you can get quite different programs based on the same prompt. But what we're working on is how you also explore. So that's if you put the exact same prompt in. But if you put semantically identical prompts, so it says the same thing, that's another source of uncertainty. So if you just say the same thing in a different way. So we're working on ways to quantify that. Data quality I also mentioned, so we'll work on data quality for multimodal data, which is largely unexplored. General benchmarking, so synthetic data generation. Interpretability, so there's a lot of work on counterfactuals and explainability, but actually whether these are actually useful in practice is an open question actually. So causal analysis is a different way to gain some interpretability, and as I said, using AI semantics within these agent workflows and language models can provide some interpretability as well. And then so how do we finally, this very important part here, which is how do we continuously monitor these algorithms post-deployment and put in kill switches, and that's what we use in engineering biology, fail safes. Okay, so just briefly on the industry support program, two different models we're looking at, so that's where we work directly with assurers. There's another support program where we work with assurer and a third party that is being assured. So we're exploring these models. If you know or working with assurers and are interested, please get in touch. So then, just the final slide on this is what I've talked about is about the UK, but just last week I was in Glasgow for the AI Standards Hub World Summit, and this is where we talk to other countries across the world on how they're going about standardisation of AI. This is in the UK. It's a partnership between NPL, UCAS, Turing and British Standards Institute. So in summary, that's the end of the talk. I hope I've given you a flavour for the good work that's going on at NPL, and I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't point out we have an open position at the moment for a trustworthy AI principal scientist. Please get in touch if you're interested. Thanks.
Bit of time for questions.
Okay, yeah.
I found that very reassuring, by the way. I don't know about the rest of you. I was just to start us off. So one question I had was, I think you mentioned about the quantization of current using single electrons.
Yeah.
And then you said, oh well, obviously this has applications for air quality. What are those? How does that apply to air quality?
Yeah, okay, I didn't explain that properly. I whizzed through that. So if we can define currents at these levels, so these technologies all use small currents to detect changes. So, in air quality, you're picking up particles changing the current. So in order to calibrate those, we need currents that are very small, so that the uncertainty is small enough to calibrate those. So that's where these kinds of new methods will help. So this is why there's this nanoamp gap, because there's no standards in that region. But whereas with these single electron pumping, we can adapt those to produce really small currents. That explains it. It's not my area. Any other questions? Yeah.
Thank you for the presentation. My name is Ali Ashur. I'm a Kuwaiti academic in the field of strategic feasibility and maritime capability building. Looking at the UK's maritime history, being an island nation, at one point in time the UK had 80% of shipbuilding capability throughout the world, between Glasgow, Rosyth and Newcastle here. And gradually that phased off from a manufacturing industry into a niche area of Lloyd's being a classification society that also punches a monopoly streak in international regulatory bodies, classification, standardization. Do you see this model being replicated in AI assurance for the UK?
Very good question. Yeah. I did, one of the problems, you raised an important point, and I actually skipped over that point. There is a bit of an information asymmetry, which is what you're referring to. So the bigger companies will end up doing all the assurance. And, that might be the case in particular sectors. So if you look at my simplified diagram here, we may have one assurer per sector, which is equivalent to Lloyd's register, isn't it? Right? They do the assurance for shipping. So I think that's okay per sector, because you're going to need special expertise per sector, but there will be assurers that can hopefully work across sectors as well. But I can't see one assurer working for everything. Is not going. is not going to work. I don't think. Yeah.
Thank you for the talk. The timescales were interesting. I think it's a 4-year time horizon, if I read the slide right. Then that's incredible. But I was thinking about Dr. Lantati's talk about the recursive self-learning AI. Are you seeing anything that could help kind of bring those timescales in sooner by using AI recursively?
I have thought about. I have somewhat of an agentic workflow for assurance. Yeah, but I wouldn't deploy it anytime soon. But so yeah, it's a good question. One of the challenges is how do we scale assurance? We can't just. Currently how it's worked is one assurer has worked with a company and then produces a case study. And that obviously can't work. So, I'm not going to answer your question directly, but we do need to scale. And that's another question, whether it's recursive systems or more agentic systems. Yeah, we're thinking about these things.
Yeah, I did a piece of work recently working on a taxonomy of trustworthy and trustworthy AI. And I just wonder if everyone kind of assumes that we assume we know what we mean when we say trustworthy AI, and I wonder how you are defining it. Do you mean systems that do what we tell them, systems that do what we meant to tell them, or what we would have told them if we knew better what we're talking about?
Well, good point. Yeah. I mean, terminology is a challenge. Actually, we have a terminology mapping tool that maps from UK, EU to the United States, and because you need this mapping, because trust in one, I'm trying to think of examples now, but trust and safe, are they the same? So we do have a tool that maps between those, and we're hoping to roll that out to help businesses. Because if you're a company and you want to sell your products, you need to understand how their regulatory framework maps to ours and all these challenges. Yeah.
Okay.
So we have a terminology tool. Yeah.
Is it available?
Not yet, but the plan will be. Yeah. But it's a great question. A lot of the challenges in this area is trying to talk about the same thing. Yeah, that's another one.
So the first two talks, things are going along at a very rapid pace. And are you and the assurance ever going to catch up? Because the impression that I get is that, for want of a better phrase, it's a bit like the Wild West out there. And will anyone ever actually follow? Because by the time you've got, actually we ought to be doing this, the next one's come along and the next one. And so, if I was going to be very cynical, is there any point in, I'm genuinely don't deliberately, how is it that governments, the UK government, you said that it could be a good position that we could be a leader within, but actually is anyone ever going to listen to us because these tech giants are going ahead so rapidly? Now, perhaps you could argue that the decision that was made about Meta and Google yesterday in relation to something completely slightly different. I don't know. I'm trying to be deliberately slightly anti-optimistic.
I'm happy to take that. And my answer to that is, have you ever tried to insure an AI system? Not assure, insure. And nobody will insure it. You cannot insure it. So, although it's true that these models are rapidly expanding in research, but what does it look like in businesses? And it doesn't look anything like that. I mean, I'm guessing it doesn't. So that's my from chatting to people. The curve is like that. It's not keeping up with that. So, have I answered your question? We'll never be assuring at that rate, but I'm not sure that we need to.
But you think businesses would follow a set of guidelines? Perhaps that's another way of rephrasing my question.
if the insurer says, how have you assured, I realise there's a
Yeah, it's all right. Yeah.
if the insurer says, have you assured your system, and they go no, and they say, well, we're not going to insure you, so they'll never deploy it.
Okay. So it's a financial.
I think it has to be.
Regulation for
I think that ultimately will drive it. Yeah.
rather than a government enforced item.
It's not the government hasn't enforced anything. Just said we want this.
Yes.
It will be financial. You know, if you're talking about businesses, it's always financial. Yeah. So will investors tick off a huge multi-million-pound investment if they can't answer basic questions about the performance of the system?
Mm-hmm.
So I think there is hope. There is hope.